Hello and good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be at Webster, my alma mater, and to be able to partake in these types of activities. So I appreciate that opportunity, and I am very excited about this session we'll be discussing next. This session, Envisioning Equitable and Sustainable Housing, brings together our expert panelists to provide an in-depth exploration of housing equity, including historical context, progress, advocacy, and programs. They'll also explore the ways in which wages, housing for people of color than ever before. To get us started, please welcome, our moderator, the incomparable Carol Daniel, and joining Carol, I should say from KMOX Radio 1120, plug for you. And joining Carol are Michael McMillian, President and CEO of the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis, and Sandra Moore, Managing Director and Chief Impact Officer at Advantage Capital. Take it away, Carol.
Thank you so much. I'm getting set here. First things first. Welcome to the virtual audience. First of all, it is so wonderful to not only be live here on Webster University's campus in Webster Groves, Missouri, but to also have you from all over the country watching us virtually. So we are taking the technology that so many of you hated during the pandemic, and we are using it to our benefit today by being virtual. So we thank you so much for tuning in that way. I know these two, so in the interest of full disclosure, I know them, I respect them, I have been to any number of fundraisers with them, and I know the work that they do. So when she introduced the expert panel, she was not talking about me. She was talking about them. I do want to start by saying that as we explore housing equity and inequity, we do want to talk about exactly what is that and what does it look like on the ground. We cannot move forward, of course, if we don't know where we have been. Historical context is obviously important. The great Stephanie Mills sang it best. When I think of home, I think of a place where there is love overflowing. And you know, I could sing it for you, but I won't. Even Dolly Parton sang, because country music, R&B, the blues, it is all about the lyric. Of course, Dolly Parton sang about her family's home, my Tennessee mountain home, that life is as peaceful as a baby's sigh in my Tennessee mountain home. Crickets sing in the fields nearby. Home is obviously a state of mind, but it is clearly a physical structure. And I believe I've told you this story before, Michael McMillian, and if you haven't, if you don't remember it, I will tell it again for those who are here and tuning in. I often joke that I married my husband for several reasons. One of those is because he had good credit. The other reason was because he was a veteran of the United States Army, and I knew as an Army brat myself that meant a VA loan, which I knew meant no down payment, because I came into the marriage with not the best credit. And so I knew this man is bringing in some resources. But as a 30-year-old, we were 30 when we met, 31 when we married, we intended to buy a home. That is not even a vision for far too many people of color in this country. And so we do want to talk about why that is, and historically why that is. We have our own history. It is across the nation, American history, that informs us as to why that may be. First, I want you each to frame what it is that your organization does and how you approach the issue of both the housing crisis and the lack of home ownership among people of color. We'll start with Sandra.
Well, thank you, ma'am. And you're smart. Oh, I guess I better do this, huh?
That's why I didn't have a handheld, because I would forget that.
And let's make certain I've not only done it, but that I have done it. All right, looks like it's ready to go. Okay, so first of all, you're a smart woman. You sort of stack the deck the way you want it to end. As you've already indicated, my name is Sandy Moore. I'm a managing director and chief impact officer at Advantage Capital. That is my most recent gig. In that gig, we invest in businesses that want to grow in distressed urban and rural communities. That is one vertical of our business. We are a private equity firm, but we invest a specific way. Additionally, we invest in or partner with and cause low-income housing developers to be able to fund their projects. We also invest in solar or alternative energy. All of these focused in distressed urban and rural communities. So in this particular gig, we are constantly looking for the opportunity to put money on the ground. We're not a charity, so we're looking to put money on the ground that will turn back into investment profit, but for the purpose of doing those things, building jobs, growing businesses, growing affordable housing, and growing alternative energy in distressed communities. There's my buddy.
We'll introduce him in just a moment.
But prior to that, I spent 16 years, I'm an urban planner, a lawyer and urban planner by training, and I spent 16 years doing nothing but working with mixed income, affordable housing developers around the country. And from that vantage point, I can tell you why this framing is so important, as you indicated, and as the panel, the summary of the panel indicates the truth of our nation, and that is that housing has historically been denied those people of color, low-income people, people living in distressed communities, many communities made distressed because of the failure to invest in housing. So that is the context, and I'm sure we will talk more about that as we go along, but we have to start with the truth of the matter in order to be able to explore how we get out of that. So against that background, we look to put investment dollars with developers. We have the pleasure of investing some for the city of St. Louis with developers who can do it, who will do it. If in fact building housing as a platform for change in distressed communities were easy and profitable, easily profitable, it would be done already. This is America. So it's tough, but we focus on that. And we want to close the gap between what it costs to build affordable housing, and it costs as much to build affordable housing as it does to build those many mansions and those real mansions. The price of plumbing doesn't change because you're in a low-income community. Mm-hmm. So we are looking to put money into the deals that will close that gap. We're looking to put money into the deals that will build the other things. Nobody's house thrives and survives on an island. You gotta have parks, streets, roads, bridges. So we look to put money into businesses that want to grow those things. And then ultimately, we want to make certain that we are tracking what we're putting money in, because as my husband says, your mouth can say anything, but we ultimately want to see what the outcome is.
Michael McMillian is the CEO and president of the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis, the largest urban league in the entire country, award-winning urban league in the entire country. And people, because of all the work that the Urban League did during the pandemic, they have this vision of the Urban League and delivering food and PPE to people, but they may or may not know the other part, the many other parts of the efforts that the Urban League puts forth in the community to increase generational wealth and to increase home ownership. Talk about that from your agency standpoint.
Well, certainly. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the presence of our chancellor.
Yes.
And thank her for her leadership, Dr. Elizabeth Strobel, who celebrated a birthday yesterday. So please join me in a big round of applause for her and her leadership here at the university, and her continued support of everything that we do at the Urban League. She has been on our board of directors for over a decade as chairperson of our education committee, involved in very serious and continuous discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion from an educational standpoint on every single level, in terms of what we do with Head Start, what we do in our grade schools, middle schools, high schools, and universities, and is our partner here at the Urban League. So thank you, Chancellor, for being so supportive of this department and empowering Vincent and Kate and everyone to do what they do to bring us all together, to share information and the rest. And to Carol, you were incredibly humble when you said that the three of us were the experts. This woman on KMOX is one of the greatest journalists St. Louis has ever seen. She is constantly...
Thank you. Thank you.
The Urban League was proud to recognize her not once, but twice, when we did our Salute to Women many years ago, and when we did a Salute to African Americans in Media for Black History Month in the past 3 years. So I have also had the privilege, honor, and pleasure of working with this dynamic woman in her previous role, where we looked at and were able to work with the community and come up with a plan to take what was the old Bluemeyer public housing right across from the Symphony, right across from Grand Center, which sadly at that time had a very high crime rate, a very low educational attainment rate, a very low rate in terms of income, and we were able to work to transform that through a Hope 6 grant with the City of St. Louis, the federal government, and the Secretary of HUD into a $169 million development that now sits there called Renaissance Place. And she worked to make sure that we always had access and opportunities for the residents. And so thank you, Sandy, for an illustrious career. And that's just one of many, many projects that she has worked on over the years. And Neal, it is an honor to be on this stage with him because this is the youngest head of St. Louis Development Corporation that you have ever seen in the history of the city of St. Louis, who has always used his platform. So he left U.S. Bank as vice president to do a career in public service, but all the while that he was at the bank and now and before that, he used his time, his talent, and his treasure to do everything that he could to create what is called Dream Builders for Equity. And if you're not familiar with them, you should look them up today. They are one of the most dynamic organizations that is in the Hyde Park community, one of the most economically devastated parts of the entire St. Louis community, hiring young people in that area to give them jobs, give them understanding, mentorship, hope, and opportunity, and then renovate buildings, renovate homes, and give people the opportunity to live the American dream and become homeowners and build their own wealth with all of his charitable work. So congratulations, Neal, on everything that you do and everything that you are. And so, Carol, now I will actually answer your question. So the Urban League is America's only not-for-profit social service advocacy agency that was created in New York 113 years ago to improve race relations between blacks and whites and people of all races, to serve African Americans. So at that time, you had a huge influx of black people leaving the discrimination of the Jim Crow South to large cities, New York, Chicago, St. Louis, Philadelphia, Baltimore, etc. And so black social workers, educators, and community activists then worked with white leaders in the business, corporate, philanthropic, and government arenas to try to do something to help these people that had moved to these cities, that needed resources, needed a place to live, needed a good education, healthcare, jobs, economic opportunity, and a way of life. And so that's what birthed the Urban League. So we, as an organization, have 4 pillars that we focus on locally and nationally. And one of them always has been and always will be affordable housing. Our former National Urban League president, Whitney Young, actually worked with Lyndon Johnson on the creation of HUD because there needed to be a federal program to infuse revenue into these cities across this country that needed revenue desperately to close these deals and to do these projects. Because just like Sandra said, the price of plumbing is not different in the Bluemeyer public housing or in a mansion in Ladue, and so when you have these projects and you have a low rent capacity on what we're doing with different rental units and or housing that we're trying to create for people to buy, the costs are still the same. So there has to be some governmental entity, some type of tax credit program or something to infuse the resources to make up that difference. And that's where HUD and organizations like hers and the work that Neal does with the city and tax increment financing and all types of additional tax credits come into play. So the Urban League has always advocated for, pushed for affordable housing, and now we're actually doing some affordable housing ourselves.
And Neal Richardson came in. We're so glad that you are here. Historic figure indeed. Michael, thank you for setting that up so beautifully, of the St. Louis Development Corporation. It's in the name, development. Talk about where the problem stands right now in increasing home ownership. And then we need to talk about wealth as it pertains to home ownership. Neal?
No, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. And Dr. Strobel, again, very appreciative of you and allowing me to come back to my alum that I am of two-time alum of Webster University. Very appreciative of this opportunity to be sitting here with giants around economic community development and economic empowerment, specifically for the low to moderate income community and Black population in the city of St. Louis. So again, I want to commend them for their hard work and their life commitment to this effort that I get to be able to move forward with into the future. But as we sit right now at the city of St. Louis under the leadership of Mayor Tashara O. Jones, SLDC has been partnering with the mayor's office on developing the Economic Justice Action Plan. We rolled this out in September of 2022 at the mayor's business luncheon. We understand diversity, equity, and inclusion are critically important. However, if we don't really understand what justice means in this whole realm of thinking, we cannot move forward. Justice is really understanding and repairing the harm that created the conditions that exist for us today. So when you talk about where we sit today, we sit with the city that's divided. We have over 59.2% of our land mass and 52.9% of our population, 300,000 people that live in the city of St. Louis, that live in what HUD calls qualified census tracts. These census tracts are where the population is 50% or more and 60% of the area median income or have a poverty rate of 25% or more. This is every census tract north of Delmar. And justly, it also correlates with the demographics in those neighborhoods. We have over 90% of the population in North St. Louis City identifying as African American. And over the last 10 years, we've lost over 27,000 Black families. It's not because they don't have a commitment to the city of St. Louis or they don't have a love and a passion for the Cardinals just like everyone else does, but it's because they don't see an opportunity where they can build a life, build a family, have access to safe and affordable health care, have access to quality food or quality jobs. And so as we think about where SLDC can play a role, we are the economic engine for creating public-private partnership that stimulates economic growth in areas that are underserved and disinvested. And so through our Economic Justice Action Plan, we have established 3 core pillars. First is economic empowerment, focused on how do we support our small women and minority-owned businesses to enter, grow, and scale in their respective industries. We opened up an Economic Empowerment Center at Sumner High School, the first Black high school west of the Mississippi. At this high school, we provide services for all economic development activity, whether you're a small business that is looking to understand how do you get a business license or occupancy permit or even a liquor license, to also helping contractors get certified through our women and minority participation programs. So they have access to our large-scale development projects, such as a soccer stadium, and it helps promote diversity for those businesses to be able to hire youth, unemployed, underemployed, give them the skills in which they can earn not just a living wage, but a thriving wage. And then our second pillar is focused on equitable development, ensuring that we're focused on the infrastructure, the commercial corridors that connect our neighborhoods, ensuring that we're investing into organizations and developers who are building projects that are focused on community needs, similar to what the Urban League has been able to establish at their new headquarters at the corner of MLK and Kings Highway, providing those social services, investing in that from a public perspective, but also aligning private and philanthropic dollars to be able to scale those investments for long-term sustainability. And the last piece, which gets us to this panel discussion today, is around neighborhood transformation. The city of St. Louis currently has over 10,000 properties within our land bank. That's city-owned property that can be activated from a liability into an asset, creating home ownership and wealth-building opportunities for many of our underserved and marginalized communities and residents. We have established a $15 million revolving loan fund to support developers of color and those who are building homes for sale for those that are at 80% AMI or below. That's about $50,000 per year. And then being able to support them on not just purchasing those homes, but getting technical assistance, the financial literacy to sustain that home in order for them to be able to grow within that community itself. We also are in the process of releasing a request for proposal to establish a mortgage assistance program to support those homeowners who are looking to purchase their first home or purchase a home in communities in which there is an appraisal gap that exists today. And as we talk about the conditions and justice, we have to think about the issues and the discriminatory practices that put us in a position where there are appraisal gaps in many of our Black and brown neighborhoods. Those are redlining, those are racial covenants that have been put within deeds that disallowed opportunities based on the color of your skin for you to begin to build wealth for your family, whether to support their future educational endeavors or also being able to support any entrepreneur activity that they want to move forward. So we cannot move forward until we address the historical harm that has been caused on these communities and the detriment of those covenants and those restrictions have placed on our neighbors. So as we look to move forward in building wealth, we hope over the next 4 years to be able to establish programs in which no matter your income level, you can be able to get access to a mortgage in a community that's thriving, has access to quality jobs, quality food, and quality education. So that's our plan, that's our goal. Mayor Jones, through her leadership, has put hard dollars behind this through the American Rescue Plan Act. And we are now calling to action our private sector as well as our philanthropic community to align and coordinate their dollars to sustain this work for long-term success.
Let me say that no one at Webster has asked me to say the following words. I don't want anyone here and anyone watching to feel uncomfortable about the very real and negative history that has led to the things we are talking about and the things we see in the community today. Do not feel uncomfortable, but feel uncomfortable. And feel so uncomfortable that you desire to be a part of the change, to be a part of the awareness and the effort to actually change these things. I only recently learned, you know, they say on social media, I was today years old. Well, I wasn't today years old, but how many of you only recently learned about the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood? And how many of you don't even know you do not know, raise your hand, what the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood, where it was and what happened to it? This panel knows, I know. St. Louis City SC, our MLS soccer team, will have its first game Saturday. It sits on what used to be the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood. 20,000 African Americans called it home. Under the guise, and you know what guise means, they were not being truthful. Under the guise of urban renewal, the city of St. Louis, and they used federal dollars as well, demolished that entire neighborhood and displaced 20,000 African Americans. 40, I believe, historic churches and other historic buildings were demolished. Where did 20,000 people go? What happened to the wealth of the businesses, the wealth of the churches that were there, the wealth of the people that was there? This was intentional and apathetic. We don't care. You're just out of here. So now when you drive on 40, you think this used to be a Black neighborhood that was described as thriving. And so I want you three to connect and this happened around the entire country. Black neighborhoods torn down in the name of urban renewal. No plan, that's a zero. No plan to help those Black families be reestablished elsewhere. Generally no plan. Talk about connect that historic fact. Do not feel uncomfortable, but feel uncomfortable. Connect that historic fact to what we see today in the wealth gap in this country and as it pertains to the gap in home ownership in this country as well?
I will happily do that, but not until I do this.
Okay.
First of all, you did a beautiful job thanking everyone. I know why we've got such a wonderful urban league. I could talk about that historical fact, but I won't until we stay right here in current history. Because the same kind of displacement that has taken place across urban America for the last 100 years, systemically, happened in Ferguson following the murder of Michael Brown. So when you do not attack systemic challenges, they repeat over and over and over again. I brought along a few things. So I'm a lawyer. I'm sorry.
Oh,
but I
yeah,
am.
you flipped through the book.
No, I am. But
I thought you were going to read. Here, you hold your own mic then.
the American Bar Association asked me to write an article, or tasked me, they don't ask, they tasked me to write an article about Ferguson. And I wrote it. And it's in the Affordable Housing and Community Development Journal. I only brought one. I'm not that girl. And they don't sell them, so I would have been handing them out, but I don't have that many. But it's volume 25, number 3. I wrote this in 2017, which is a look, an analytical look, and a legal look at how it was that we had nearly 3,000 units of deeply subsidized housing, that means public money in it, surrounding the community where Michael Brown died. And he died in the street because there were no sidewalks. How do you build a community in partnership with public dollars and put nearly 3,000 people there, all of whom had to need subsidy in order to live in that housing? Many of them 2- and 3-bedroom units, while most single poor people or working class people don't need 2 or 3 bedrooms. So that meant there would be children, and you have no sidewalks. He lay in the street because there was no sidewalk. Now, the reason that I bring that forward is because that community now has been virtually emptied out. There were working class homeowners in that community, and they are gone. And Neal is nodding his head, and I want to say this, and I want to say it with all due respect and without any finger pointing at all. This is truly what I have devoted my life to. That property was largely purchased by foreigners, offshore, and they are repurposing it now as low quality, low performing rental housing. So we can talk about the displacement of Mill Creek, where my parents lived and married and met. And we can talk about the hollowing out of the north side of the city of St. Louis that was so vibrant. And we can talk about the hollowing out of the West End. There was no Central West End, right, Michael? There was the West End. That's where I grew up, with big, beautiful homes that people of color lived in. But I do not want you to forget, and all of that was systemic, but I do not want you to think it has stopped. This article was 2017. I wrote another in 2018. I could probably write another one now. So we can talk about the history, and
we should,
but we must be cognizant of what Neal is saying and what Michael is saying. Michael is saying we are building the human support infrastructure that will allow people who need assistance and support to live in the housing that the city of St. Louis is putting money on the ground, some to my firm, to invest in. And then my firm, a private firm in partnership with the city and in support of the Urban League, must be held accountable for doing that which we have been given resources to do. It is a circle. It is not an episodic thing. So I didn't answer your question.
Do not
but
ever apologize to me, Sandy Moore. No.
I had to say all those things.
You need not ever apologize.
Well, and so, Carol, as you mentioned, and as Sandra alluded to, this is not the only time that has happened, right? So Mill Creek is where Wells Fargo is. It surrounds what We see as Harris Stowe that used to be Vashon High School, which was a high school for the African American community that lived there. And as you said, in the name of urban renewal and the extension of downtown, you had 20,000 African American families, businesses, institutions, and that's where the professional Black business class operated. So that's where you'd go to the doctor, the lawyer, the Black newspapers, and other Black shops, tailors, and everything else. And so that decimated that community, but that's not the only one. You know, when you go and enjoy Central Park in New York, there was a whole Black community there that was wiped out as well. When you go to the Target and the Deerbergs and all the different stores up there by the Galleria right off of Highway 40, that was a Black community as well. And so this has happened all too often in terms of urban renewal and development. And so what we have to do is to try to make sure that, for example, as I alluded to the Blumeyer project earlier, right, when you do have urban renewal and development, because we desperately need that, that you make sure that the people that actually live there then have an opportunity to stay, that they will be able to continue on with their lives in the neighborhood that they grew up in and that they want to live in, and give them that, you know, option as a result of all of us working together to find the resources to make sure that they do that. That is the right way to proceed. That's the kind of leadership that Neal and his team have in terms of what they want to do and how they want to reinvest in North City and take all of these vacant, abandoned, derelict buildings and lots and have them renovated and turned into something beautiful, so that the people that actually live in North City now that have stayed will then have the ability to continue on and be a part of the revitalization.
Neal, the wealth gap is central to this discussion as well. It's not the only thing, but it's central. In the Federal Reserve, one of the Federal Reserve banks, are 12, central banks in the country, but one of them wrote in 2018, the net wealth of the typical Black family in America is around 1/10 of a white family, and that no progress in closing the wealth gap has been made in 70 years. No progress.
You actually took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to use that data point. I was going to put my Webster University education in unison. And I always use my my facts and my statements being more data informed. And so as we talk about the wealth gap, as you mentioned, there is a Black households on average have 1/10 of what a white household holds in wealth. They also have employees, Black employees within the country make about 40 cents on the dollar of what a white employee makes within the country. This is not just a moral imperative, this is an economic imperative also for our country, for our state, and for our city. McKinsey did a study that if we were able to close the wealth gap just based on race, we would add $1.5 trillion to our overall gross domestic product. So it's not, again, just about us saying we want to be socially focused on supporting Black families and Black households. This has an impact on everyone. So this is not just a Black issue. This is an issue that we all must address collectively, because it's pulling down the economic potential of our entire country, of our region, and of our state. And so as we're having conversations on the national level with the Biden administration, with even the state level, about why we need resources within the city of St. Louis, because we have over, again, 27,000 Black households that left the city, and most of them even left the region because they didn't see opportunities for themselves. And the majority of the wealth that's been accumulated over years is through a couple ways. The first is home ownership. The second is through stocks, bonds, and other inheritances. And then other ways is through workforce development and having connections to the network of opportunities, right? So if we're looking to really build wealth, ownership is key. And one of the stories that I heard, I spent a lot of time with the organization that supports Mill Creek now, of the residents, the only living residents from Mill Creek Valley. And they didn't have opportunities to own those homes. Mm-hmm. So when it was time to displace them, those homes were owned, that they were renting, by white families. So they didn't even get to decide their own fate in a lot of ways. And so that's part of what we need to also address is ownership is key. Ownership is important, but then also political will. And I think for far too long, we've been left out of the political system. And now with the resurgence of Black leadership, we also must protect those who have a social mind around supporting low to moderate income families and households. What happened in Ferguson was important for us to come out and raise recognition and awareness of the issues that have been happening and impacting our communities in a negative way. But it didn't stop there. It can't stop there. We must continue to fight every day. The fight is not over because Mayor Tashara O. Jones is the first Black woman mayor of the city of St. Louis is in her seat. We need to continue to show progress, help move the vision forward of how we create economic opportunities for everyone to thrive. And that comes with policy, that comes with investment, that comes with alignment and commitment and accountability to our corporate partners, to our philanthropic partners, because again, as I said at the beginning, we're all in this together. This is something that we all have to own in order for us to move forward. And if one of us fails, all of us is impacted.
Sandy, I can feel you.
Yeah, I just want to add two pieces to,
Get on.
for you to,
Yeah. No, just hold it to your mouth.
a couple of pieces to add to Neal's perspective on the racial wealth gap and how it impacts. That same wealth gap destroys the ability of Black and brown entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. The most important money to an entrepreneur's endeavor is friends and family money. Well, if you don't have any friends and family money, you start out undercapitalized, and that is what the data says, that Black and brown businesses are undercapitalized. Well, if you are undercapitalized, you may chug along, but you will never be able to grow. There's a whole body of capital which we invest in called growth capital. But you've got to have the ability to grow, and if you started off behind the eighth ball, you will remain behind the eighth ball. So there goes business growth and opportunity. The most important and vital part of a vital community is housing, business growth and development, and jobs. The largest employers of people of color are entrepreneurs of color. So follow this line. You start behind the eighth ball, you have fewer entrepreneurs of color who grow, therefore you have fewer employees are in companies that are growing. I mean, guys and women, this is a systemic problem that has to be attacked all along this. So I wanted people to link up with Neal to understand that's why we don't have the same level of entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Because you get to a point where you don't have anything else. Mm-hmm. You don't have another credit card that you can put up. You don't have friends and family who can sign anything else for you, and you just tap out. And those are the businesses that you walk around and see in distressed communities, and they're hanging on, and they're a local confectionery, but they don't have any glitz, they don't have any glamour. And the last thing, and 40% of them died during the pandemic because of what? They had no internet connectivity to do online sales.
Mm. And two things about that. Greater St. Louis Inc. in its report said that if African Americans in this region were creating companies at the same rate as their white brothers and sisters, that's the phrase I always use, but that's not what they said, there would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, panel, there would be 6,000, I believe that was the number, 6,000 additional businesses in the St. Louis region. Then I would make the connection that think about how are schools funded primarily? Property taxes. Who pays property taxes? Homeowners. So if you live in a community that doesn't have home ownership, you don't have a lot of resources going into your school district. And the state of Missouri, God love you, show me state, but does not fully fund education, public education in the state of Missouri. So you cannot rely on state funding and you cannot rely on federal funding for a school district in North St. Louis to have the amount of resources as a school district in Clayton or Ladue. It's just not going to happen. So increasing homeownership is a lovely thing in some minds, but it's a real economic engine overall to every aspect of the community. And I want you all to address this notion, and this is the reporter in me. I support you, and I believe I'm unapologetically supporting the notion that Black people deserve home ownership and that it has been a systemic effort to keep Black people from owning homes from every angle. But the reporter in me likes to ask opposing questions. So what do you say to those who say that this is a behavioral issue, this is a character issue? You can save money just like I saved money, they might say, in certain parts of the community.
I would definitely want to chime in there, because I think what you hit on in the question that you asked me the first time is the wealth gap has not moved in 75 years. We've invested in a lot of public housing. We've had all of these big pie in the sky ideas, these flash in the pans, but what Sandra talked about is the systemic issues that have been created that we must tackle. We need key interventions that will begin to return and reverse that tide and create a new system in which people can create economic opportunities. So as you talk about people being able to save in the same rate and people having other people who are not disadvantaged feeling as though something may be getting taken from them, this is not a zero-sum game. We're hoping to grow the pie here and create more opportunities. But I'll also say, as again, Webster University, while I love this university, it costs me money, right? It costs. You have to run a business. It costs to go to school. It's to get a higher level of education that has afforded me the opportunities to grow in my professional career. But unfortunately, I had to carry that debt myself. I didn't have a family that had wealth that they can contribute towards my education. So that set me back among my peers. I had an individual sitting next to me and myself that did have somebody that can pay for their student loan debt. So when they get out of college, they have a better opportunity to invest their dollars, to save into a 401k or contribute toward their 401k, to begin to save for their kids' education. And then it compounds over time. And so while I'm not able to make those same savings or those same financial decisions because my discretionary income is not as high as theirs, I have to pay student loans. That has an impact on the wealth that I am able to accumulate, as well as the wealth I'm able to pass down to my daughter and other future generations. So that's why we need these interventions. That's why we need to talk about the harm that's been caused and really raise awareness about the challenges of Black and brown individuals because of that history. Because without it, this problem will continue to grow and manifest. And we will see another 75 years of that gap continuing to impact the future of economic opportunity for people of color.
Michael, I heard it said recently that, the time is right, like right now. This is the time. All the elements are in place. The people are in place. The energy is in place to transform parts of St. Louis. Things are happening. You mentioned Dream Builders for Equity. Things are happening. Can you talk about that?
Well, one thing I wanted to go back to,
Yes.
Carol, was when we were talking about business, right? And you were talking about jobs, and we were talking about African Americans and people of color hiring other people of color. So in my previous role, when I worked for the city, I was in charge of business taxation and regulation and looking at the number of staff that people had. And so the average Black company had one employee. Mm-hmm. And was basically someone with an idea saying that I want to try to create a business for myself. But when you talk about capital to scale the idea, it just simply wasn't there. So, I would challenge each and every one of us individually, us as institutions, right? and organizations. And so the first thing I would say to each of us is, when this is over with, go on your phone and look in your checking account and see if you see one black business in the money that you spent in the past month. If you can't find one, then scroll back 2 months, 3 months, scroll back an entire year and see if there is one black-owned company that's in your personal expenditures, and say, okay, well then I need to change. I need to be about change, right? I need to do something different than what I am doing, because what you see is that unless you are intentional about seeking out and supporting black businesses, there are so few that it won't even come across your radar, right? And so then how will these companies ever grow if well-intentioned people that want to do the right thing have not focused in this particular way from a personal, professional, organizational, and then from an institutional standpoint? So in addition to that, I would say, if you haven't been able to find a business, look at where you invest your money, right? Look at your professional services. So who does my taxes? Have I sought out a Darlene Davis, for example, to do my taxes, who runs a very competent, qualified, capable African-American female-owned company? Have I used a black attorney when I do my legal work? Have I used a black accountant when I needed to hire an accountant? Have I used a black professional in a majority organization so that they then have credit for that? Because as Sandra knows, as an attorney, when you need to make partner, they look at your book of business. How much business do you bring to the table? And so the average black person didn't go to John Burroughs, and they didn't go to SLU High, and they didn't go to St. Louis U and all these other institutions like Webster and the rest, where they have a network to be able to say, well, I'm able to bring $1 million of business to this law firm. So that means I will make partner, right? And so often, even when you see black attorneys that have been at firms for years and then they go up for partner, they get denied because they don't have that book of business. Because those of us that have the capacity are not front of mind thinking about how we need to empower these individuals and these businesses so that St. Louis can be viewed as the Atlanta of the Midwest, right? That we can be seen as a place where people, no matter what your race, ethnic background, sex, orientation, or anything, have the capacity to succeed. And I would say, going back to Neal's point about every single person then benefiting, sadly, those of us that are from St. Louis that have lived here our entire lives have seen every census come and go where we did not grow at the national average, not above, just even at the national average on every census. And now the city itself has gone from 850,000 to around 300,000. We cannot afford to be a city with less than 300,000 people in it. We need the city core to have over 300,000 people and grow and be a thriving area where we all want to go. And we need this region to grow. And so if you look at that growing pie that Neal just talked about, take Atlanta over the past 5 decades. Every single census, they have grown 1 million plus people, 1 million, and have now one of the busiest airports in the world, and are seen as a place for people to be able to go, have careers, have lives, and thrive in their business community. And that's what St. Louis can do when we embrace everyone and make sure that everybody has a seat at the table.
Can you explain that 300,000 figure, why that's important?
Well, it's so incredibly important because in order for Neal to do his job, the federal government allocates funding for community development block grant, for HUD, for health, for human services, for infrastructure matches, and for capital based on population. So that's why cities like New York, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, Miami, Philadelphia get much more in revenue than we do because they have more population. And so when you lose population, you lose those federal resources and their capacity to then grow. And then so what you end up having is a city that has a higher and higher and higher concentration of low to moderate income people that are living in poverty, that you then have a shrinking tax base, that you have the inability to take care of those same people in those same institutions. And then you have the 27,000 black families that flee because they don't see an opportunity for themselves. So what that turns into when you drive through North St. Louis and you go into the community is this huge array of vacant, abandoned, derelict buildings and vacant lots. Every single vacant lot that you see in North St. Louis used to have a home or a business on it. And so what you're watching is the systemic result of policy and change and abandonment over the past 60 years.
Talk about what we are missing when we talk about the growth of the region. So I've eaten in St. Charles, I've shopped in St. Charles County, and the St. Charles County executive will talk about, and rightfully so, because he's an elected official. He has to speak for his constituents there, but he will talk about how they are the #1 growing county in the state of Missouri. And the last time I had him in the studio, I said, congratulations, tell me what you feel about the fact that the region is shrinking. So St. Charles County can grow, you're part of the region, but the region is shrinking. So what do you feel about that? And he didn't really, dive into that like I wanted him to, but like I really wanted him to. But why is that something we should concern ourselves with? Because he did not go there where I wanted him to go, but why should we be thinking about the notion that the region is shrinking? Everybody talks about St. Louis is dying and St. Charles County is growing, but we are a region.
Well, Carol, the simple answer is because you need an integrated plan in order to have an integrated success, right? So if you don't have an integrated plan, then you have episodic success at this or that or the other, but you don't have a comprehensive approach. In my old world with housing developers, the first thing that has to happen, you gotta have a master plan. You can't just tell me how you're gonna put up 400 units of housing. What's the master plan? Where were the parks? Where were the streets? Where were the roads? Where were the bridges? Where are the schools? So the reason that the region is important is because you don't just drive to the St. Charles border and stop and ne'er the twain shall meet, nor do you drive to the border of the river and ne'er the twain shall meet. So a regional plan means an integrated plan, which means you can take a comprehensive approach. Now, what does that look like? What can it mean? And I'm not speaking now out of my love of St. Louis. I'm speaking from having worked in every major metropolitan area in this country. You find a distressed place? Sandy Moore has been there working. I'm still waiting to not be in the distressed places, but it doesn't seem like it's in my cards. What I've seen is you look at Shelby County in Tennessee, and you see that Memphis City and Shelby County merged around certain important issues like the school district, and they have an integrated school district, and look at how they soared. Because why do people leave the city sometimes? Because they don't like the school system.
Right.
So a regional approach got torn down in Shelby County, and that area, the city of Memphis proper, is 3 times the size of St. Louis. 3 times the size of St. Louis. There, you go out east and you look at Camden, New Jersey, which used to be fighting between East St. Louis and Camden. They were historically known as the poorest or the second poorest. Right. They fought to see which one was the worst off. Go look at the data on Camden now, as it has become an integrated school district. That's important to families, an integrated school district, and has really taken public money and driven business development, but it's all out of a comprehensive plan. I had the pleasure in my old job of writing, my firm wrote the human capital plan for the city of Camden, which the state then endorsed and the region then endorsed. So, you know, it is wonderful that our county executives here and there in all the counties talk about their areas and so forth. That's a really good thing. We want every place to grow, but you can't really put that puzzle in a frame if every piece can just fly on its own and fall out. At some point, you got to snap those pieces together, and then you have a regional frame, and everything can thrive. And then the last thing I want to say is why 300,000? Why Michael's telling you that's important? Because we are fast about to be a small city. We really are a small city, but that's a secret. Nobody heard me say that. But if we drop below 300,000, we get out of the realm of a major metropolitan area.
And Neal, I want you to speak to that, but we know that we have people here and in our virtual audience that are all around the country. And so we may be talking specifically about the city of St. Louis County, and the surrounding counties. But as Sandy has pointed out, this is a national conversation. What is happening in the city of St. Louis is happening in urban areas around the country. The division and the inability, really, to come together and create a master plan. So this is a national issue, not just the city of St. Louis. Neal?
And I think my fellow panelists spoke to it very eloquently about the need for us to stay above 300,000 people. But as you talk about the infrastructure, the city of St. Louis was built for close to 1 million people. And so now having to manage just the infrastructure, the roads, the streets, and the other amenities that are needed, we still have that infrastructure that exists. Yeah. And so when we're having to lose resources focused on population decline, we have to make very thoughtful decisions on where those resources are actually appropriated and allocated. And what we've seen over the last 5 decades, because we've seen a declining population in the city of St. Louis since 1953, is that those resources have went to areas in which there were more white and affluent neighborhoods and businesses. So as you ride through North St. Louis City, the roads, the infrastructure, the sidewalks, the streets are not well maintained because there's not enough resources being allocated from the federal or the state level due to the population decline. So that's a critically important fact. And as we think about the region, we are a region of close to 1.2 million people. And so we have to think collectively around how we drive economic growth for those 1.2 million people, and not just look at our small dot of 300,000 in the city of St. Louis. How do we work comprehensively on workforce development strategies, on business empowerment? When we're doing business retention and expansion and attraction efforts at the city and the county, we don't want to compete against each other. We want to be able to sell the region, sell the strengths of the city, sell the strength of St. Charles, sell the strength of Chesterfield or Brentwood. Why St. Louis, the region, the metropolitan area is critical and a place where you want to bring your 3,000 to 4,000 employees to, because that's how we grow. We have to sell St. Louis as a full region and not just point out the negatives about each other, but what are the strengths that we can leverage to have a more strengthened and valuable region as large.
I know that we have time for questions, not a lot of time, but we do have time for questions if you have them. But I do want to end with this, because I was online, as many of you are, watching the previous session with Rebecca Bennett, who talked about healing as a pathway to liberation. And she mentioned the phrase, and I had to write it down. I was in the newsroom watching that panel, and she said, "It's not our fault, but it is our work." It is not our fault, but it is our work. Now, if it is your fault, anybody watching or listening, then it's really your work. But collectively, not our fault, but it is our work. And the other thing Rebecca said, and I want you to comment on this before we get ready for questions, is we risk burnout because we are not using our resources. I know that Michael McMillian works 7 days a week and probably gets 5 hours of sleep a night, because I have asked him, do you sleep? And he said, yeah, look, occasionally. So I want to ask you about how you are maintaining and how you are not, with the very large issues. Neal, you're so young in the position that you're in. how are you holding burnout at bay? What are you doing? You start. What are you doing?
You know, I don't really know. I don't really know.
That's honest.
You've caught me by surprise on a day that I could write burnout in capital letters. And this is fondly said, it is who I am. I'm an old girl. So I really could write burnout in capital letters. I think what I know is you do what you love. And when you are doing what you love, and I've had the great pleasure of never, ever doing work I didn't believe in, then the energy comes, and then you pray.
That purpose will give you energy. Michael McMillian, the one who 7 days a week don't really sleep. I think he was lying to me. He don't sleep at all.
I wish there was an option. You know, I would say just like Sandra, if you are able to turn your passion and your purpose into your profession, then you love what you do. You don't really see it as a job. You see it as your mission on earth. Really, this is what I was put here to do, and this is what I'm going to use the time, talent, and treasure that the Lord has blessed me to be able to use as long as he is able to use me. And hopefully in as many ways as possible. And at this stage, you know, I would say, how do you use these to do bigger and better things? Because having been in this work since I was a teenager, quite frankly, I hope that we would have been much further along as a city, as a region, as a nation, in terms of race relations and making sure that everybody had a seat at the table, that we were moving in a steady drumbeat forward versus what really is more like a heartbeat that goes up and down with justice. As soon as you move forward and you think certain things are set in stone, that you can then see those same things undone. So I think that those of us that have this as a passion, we do it in a way that, quite frankly, is in some people's eyes unsustainable, and where you could easily get burned out. But if it's your passion, you won't.
You better not be burned out. You're 12. I mean, come on. Come on. I respect you greatly, Neal.
No, I appreciate it. And, I know Mike has worked in city government, and so I come from a corporate space, spending 15 years in the corporate real estate realm. Things just don't move fast enough for me in city government. And sometimes it's because of antiquated systems. It's educating and training people on new vision that's being laid out and set. And, you know, I think my first 2 years in this role has taught me that it's not about me, and there's also strength in numbers, right? I have to really shrink myself and elevate my purpose. And it's not about me. And I think a lot of times when especially young professionals come into these spaces of high visibility, we lose sight of the purpose and the mission, and we make it about ourselves. And we got to make everything work. Everything has to be perfect. We can't take a loss. We have to get these wins. We have to keep pushing. But what many of my mentors and partners, such as Michael and Sandy, have allowed me to understand is that there is strength in community. There are people here that can help you and support you, and you don't have to carry everything. And learn from their wisdom, learn from their talents, learn from their failures and successes, so I don't have to make those same mistakes. I don't have to plow down all the trees because they've laid the foundation already. Follow their path, follow their leadership, and find ways in which you can bring people along with you. So when you get to the end of the journey, or you continue to move that journey forward, you're not alone, and you have people to help refresh you, have people to remind you that it's not about you, it's about the purpose of the work. And that's what keeps me motivated every day, rather than the burnout. But I still feel it. So I don't think I have all the answers, but I think it's more about shrinking yourself and being focused on the purpose of the work.
And let me say to you, Neal, that the great poet, essayist, author, actress, activist Maya Angelou said that I am the dream of the slave. And I would say to you, Neal, that not only are you the dream of the slave, but you are the dream of your mother and your grandmother. And you are my dream
And mine.
as a young man, as a young black man who is making waves and who left corporate America to step into a city government role, which is, we would all imagine, is less money. I don't, but you are our dream. You are absolutely our dream.
That is right.
And we thank you. That is Neal Richardson, who is the CEO of the St. Louis Development Corporation. Michael McMillian is the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater St. Louis, of Metropolitan St. Louis, the largest urban league. I always say that, in the entire country. It's important to know. And Sandy Moore is managing director. She has great history, incredible connections in this region, director and chief impact officer of Advantage Capital. Weren't they dynamic? So informative. Thank you so much. I have more questions for them because I think we have just a few minutes left if we have questions in the audience.
I'll take maybe 2 or 3 questions, and I have one here already.
We've seen the growth or the economic development that Cortex has been providing, and then NGA, the National Geospatial, for those who may not be aware, a huge area is at another Mill Valley. How are we converting what's going on with Cortex and NGA to benefit the brown and black community?
Good question.
No, that's a great question. And so one of the things that we've revamped is our incentive process at SLDC. So ensuring that every large business employer, as they're looking to develop or bring employees or hire employees within the city, within the region, that they actually are meeting with the St. Louis Public Schools, that they are creating opportunities for entrepreneurs of color. We are taking a step further and have put investment into our compliance and oversight for our and our women and minority-owned business enterprise process to ensure that if a developer has, the $1.7 billion development that's happening at NGA, that they hire Black, Latinx, Native American, and other ethnic groups to support the construction of those projects. But we also are creating strategic partnerships with organizations such as Cortex to ensure that they are creating programs to support entrepreneurs of color. And we're holding them accountable because if they're going to be a partner with the city and they are looking for a public investment, we need a public benefit. Mm-hmm. And so with every one of those agreements, we're having those community benefit agreements built into it and ensuring that our youth, our unemployed, our underemployed, and our underrepresented communities and residents are being put at the front of the process rather than the back end of the process.
Next question.
Hello. You spoke about St. Charles County, and there's no secret that public transportation stops at the border of St. Charles County. So how do you work within a region that has areas who are not ready to do all the things necessary to grow the region as a whole?
Anybody?
I guess that'll be me too.
I'll try, Neal, because I've seen it in other places. I have to tell you, I haven't seen it run as deeply in many places as it runs here in the city of in the St. Louis region. But I think we have to keep at it. I think that's the only way. There are some things that are going on. The tight relationship that exists, professional, I'm not talking friendship, professional relationship that exists between our Honorable Tashara O. Jones and our St. Louis County Executive. That's one step. That's one step because that's not always been so. As we reach across the river and talk about plans for downtown East St. Louis and the downtown riverfront in St. Louis, that's another step. So I think, one, intentionally keeping at it, and two, eating it like you eat all other elephants, biting a piece at a time and building the partnerships. And here's the thing that we know for sure. When economic vitality happens, everybody wants some of that. And I love St. Charles, and I'm sure that it's going to continue to have a wonderful history. But at some point, it too will find that it has got a significant amount of growth in low to moderate income parts of the community, because people of all income levels move where they think opportunity is happening. So you have to be forward thinking. There's no place that knows better how to manage that than the city of St. Louis. So I think we just keep at it and keep piecing away at a comprehensive plan with vision.
Next question.
Two-part question. Is the city, I'm sorry. It is. Well, it's kind of like.
Vincent Fluellen, ladies and
I'm
gentlemen.
sorry. Is the city still offering big tax abatements for the large houses that they're now building in the city? And for the people that are moving or that live near NGA, what are we doing about when the growth starts happening, when they start building the big houses there? Those people will be displaced because they won't be able to afford those houses anymore. So what are we doing about ensuring that people get to continue to stay in their community?
I'll take the second half. Neal has to take the first half. But the second half I'll take because the NGA contract was awarded following the award of a Choice Neighborhood Grant to the communities surrounding NGA. And the Choice Neighborhood Grant was awarded under my watch as president of a development company, Urban Strategy. So that's that's the backdrop against which I know. And from the inception, when we wrote the Choice Neighborhood application that the city allowed us to write and the city supported and signed on, and that's why HUD said yes, because it was the public, the city, and the private partnership, our firm and another, working on it. We wrote in sustained affordability, housing protected affordability for the low-income families in that community. So there is a set number of affordable units that will continue to exist there infinitely around NGA. Now, will it be enough? No, it won't, because as that place flies like it's going to fly, there will need to be more. But there's already been protection for a significant number of low-income households that were living in public housing surrounding that area. I'll pass to Neal.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that point, we also are working towards ensuring that the neighborhood themselves, the residents that currently live there, the mayor put forth a appropriation through ARPA through the real estate tax relief program. So if anyone that was at any burden of losing their home, they had support with any incremental tax increase on their house. In addition to that, we have put in a neighborhood plan in place, engaging all of the neighborhoods, all of the residents surrounding NGA. It's called Project Connect, around the 6 neighborhoods. We're going through a neighborhood planning process where the residents are continually engaged. They put forth policy recommendations for the Board of Aldermen to consider, but also they are designing their neighborhoods. So whether they want a coffee shop, a barber shop, a grocery store in that area, they are all part of that design process. And then we have a team that's focused also on implementation, because a lot of times we do a neighborhood plan, but then the implementation falls short. So we're doing the plan and the implementation of allocating resources associated with that plan in conjunction with each other. To hit on your initial question around tax incentives, we have reformed the tax incentive process to ensure that anytime we provide any incentive or abatement on any project, that it has some form of community benefit. However, we need to continue to grow our tax base. If a property that is sitting vacant in North St. Louis City is only generating $300 to $500 of property tax revenue, we need to find ways to drive and incentivize development to happen there. And if it's for us to keep that constant for 5 years, for a developer to come and redevelop that property and now it's contributing over 4x that impact, then we need to be able to make those strategic investments and decisions, because we have to find ways to incentivize development and homeowners to move into areas that the market currently doesn't support or have any interest in developing. And so that's our strategy, but also keeping the community first through our new community benefit scorecard.
You guys are so dynamic, and as a longtime member of the media, I would challenge us all to reframe our thinking and our awareness around this issue. There are pervasive belief systems that say that Black people are uneducated and are violent and don't love their children and are not engaged in healthy relationships and therefore don't want to even be homeowners and don't have the character to do so and to sustain healthy communities. And nothing could be further from the truth. The desires are there. And if we treated the crack cocaine epidemic like we are treating the opioid epidemic, we might not be in some of the situations we are in. It is called a crisis now. It was a criminal issue then. We have to change our mindset. We have to change our awareness and be unapologetic and bold. I know what's happening around the country. That's why this conference, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as a conference with 2,500 people, an increase of 30%, I am told by my friend Vincent. This is boldness happening on the campus of Webster University. And where boldness is, change is also. So I would like to thank my dear friend, the Chancellor of this great institution, Dr. Beth Strobel, for being so bold as to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion conference in this current state of political divisiveness. And I would also like to thank the Chief Diversity Officer here, my dear friend Vincent Flewellen, for leading this and creating such a fabulous, informative, passionate conference as this. Webster is making moves and changing minds and growing the entire conversation, and we thank you for doing that. Thank you to my panel. Thank you so much. Thank you for those of us who are joining us here and out there. I'm Carol Daniel with KMOX Radio. Thank you so much.